Let's bring it back to where you're coming from. Where can you start if you're interested in being a creative designer for this type of new platform, which, yeah, it's got some screens, but it's not like a tablet. It's not like a smartphone. Where can you start? Well, if we're going to look in the chatbot space, all of the big messaging platforms have their own developer portals and software development kits. Those are usually pretty comprehensive. They're also, the type of platforms to where, yeah, you do have to subscribe to Facebook's, view of the world. If you look up at the top, pull string, and pull strings like from the toy. You remember, Woody from Toy Story. There's a snake in my boot. When you pull the string, it talks. This is one of the more developed independent platforms. You can do voice services on top of that, and it'll export to Facebook. It'll go to Amazon Alexa. You can go to most any of the platforms that you want with this type of voice file. You can, it's got a lot of bells and whistles, so there's definitely a learning curve there. But if you just want to start out for chatbots, I'd go to Tin Can AI. That's by a company called Conversant Labs. And by the way, the presentation I've got in the notes have got all the links. Domenico can distribute that. Don't worry right now. But Tin Can AI is good if you want to create voice scripts for Alexa, and you don't need to know a line of code. Most of these have got their own AI and machine learning runtimes. They've got authoring environments to where basically if you can figure out the dialogue that works on the human side, they can export it to the technology platforms. And so if that's for chatbots and virtual assistants, if you want to know about more about what emotional computing is, Affectiva is another good company to check out. Affectiva was founded by Dr. Rosalind Picard from MIT, who actually pioneered a lot of the research on emotional computing and how to deduce emotions algorithmically. Also, Affectiva has the world's largest database of facial expressions, about 4.5 million. And also, these facial expressions are across 9 geographic regions. So it's not that classic weird problem. Western, educated, I can't remember the last one, but a lot of our data is skewed towards Western audiences. Now, Affectiva's got a pretty robust database of facial expressions, plus their research blog has some really top-end information that will help you understand more about the state of the art of emotional computing, and also what are some of the research problems that are left. And then, of course, Cosmos SDK. Again, you don't need to be a robotics PhD. Once you learn this particular SDK, you can start writing scripts, and the little robot will do it. Originally, did anyone ever try Lego Mindstorms? Which Lego company, I see one hand back there. Lego did that, and you did need to know a good bit of tech to make Mindstorms work well. Cosmos basically taking a lot of that learning and making it much more accessible. Personally speaking, I've been traveling a lot and speaking a lot. I'm waiting for just some nasty, wet days in Seattle in December and January just to start playing around with that and making my little Cosmo chase the cat. Which, by the way, it's interesting to watch the reaction of my cat to this creature, to Cosmo, because I also have a Roomba, which is the robot that does the vacuuming, which, by the way, is one hell of a great application. I've met people where it's like, it didn't work, but I've got hardwood floors, so when I can just hit it and walk out and know that I'm coming back into the floor's vacuum, that's magic. That is definitely magic. But speaking of that, this is where things get, this is sort of like the hairy part of the show. When you start telling people, regular people, Not people who are interested in storytelling like us. Not people who are in the in the technology industry, but just regular people. When you start setting expectations, you're playing with fire in both a good way and a bad way. Because when people start to imprint and set up these expectations, then your degrees of freedom dramatically shrink, because you got to meet that expectation and you have to delight them. And right now, and I can especially say in my own country, the technology industry is asking itself some pretty serious questions. Because I'll tell you quite honestly, it's just by pure coincidence, I was in the UK 8 days before Brexit, and I just went through the current US election. And I can say the polls, the experts, the data, they got it wrong. And I'm not just talking an error, I'm talking dead-ass wrong. And a lot of that has to do, in my opinion, with some of the reinforcement. And some people call it an echo chamber. Actually, in the academic world, they call it the Matthew problem with Google Scholar, which is you get a new field, you have somebody who writes the first paper, his name's Matthew, and then the next researcher comes along, cites Matthew's paper. The paper might be crap, but it gets cited, and the algorithm scores it, and then the third researcher cites the second researcher and the first researcher. Now the first researcher has been cited twice, so it keeps rising. We're supposed to have cream rising, but if we're not careful, we can get crap rising. And when we do that, we actually see that there is a conflict potentially between culture and code. And Edward O. Wilson said, who's a Harvard, actually, etymologist, he studies ants, but he's also a very famous and conscientious scientist. He says, we have Stone Age emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technology. We thrash about. And right now, especially with climate change and with some of the problems facing us, where technology has caused a lot of these issues, but also technology is the only answer legitimate of getting out of some of these dilemmas, we've really got to start thinking, not only as designers, but also as storytellers, what kind of narratives are driving this stuff? And it's my firm belief that especially this type of audience, our job is to housebreak technology. Just like you bring a new pet home, you got to housebreak that thing. There's going to be accidents. There's got to be mess that you clean up. And no pet or no living thing or nothing that really touches us well is going to work perfect out of the box. So if we're going to have this fusion of magic and logic, we got to start thinking about how do our engineers and our creatives work better together. Now, that's easy to say, but in specifics, engineers are going to have to start dealing with, well, I guess I'd call it an outcome-based bias towards design. Engineers, you say, it's got to work according to this particular condition, and they build to it. Well, now, translate into products, what that means is that I build this one solution and I scale it to millions of people. That's been the classic model. I build an outcome, I scale it to millions. Well, now, the issue is that I've got to be able to handle millions of people who are dealing with my product in a slightly different way. A lot of engineers don't handle that very well. A lot of creatives, on the other hand, they don't deal with process very well. And by process, I mean the ability to basically take a look at what can I build, what can I make that's extremely solid today that I know that is not perfect, that I know has to make some compromise, that I know has to be robust not only in its aesthetic message, but the ability for a lot of people to handle it. And those are some of the challenges that I firmly believe are just as important as understanding what the back-end SDK is, or understanding how am I going to make this particular character the most attractive. And I believe augmented characters, basically how we make them connect with people, not only from an efficiency point of view, but from a delight point of view, and also in a way that is, I guess, kind to both culture and the environment, that is actually going to be one of our biggest challenges going forward. And so I'm very excited for what you're doing with this institute. I heard yesterday that it's a new thing, and none of the AV worked as advertised. It was really hard. Those are the necessary teething pains that anything worthwhile has to go through. So I salute you for, what you're trying to accomplish here. I appreciate your time, and I'm happy to take any questions.